Welcome to Bad Takes. I'm Laura McGann, the executive editor of Grid, and I am here with my co-host, Matthew Iglesias. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Hey, it's going well. It's going well.
So, this week, you've got the bad take, right?
I do. So this is a bad take. This is a take about a prominent YouTuber named MrBeast, who I will admit I was not super familiar with, even though he is probably orders of magnitude more famous than you or me or anyone else in political punditry. But, you know, this is the young people. They are off and in their own world. So MrBeast started his channel in 2012 when he was only 13 years old. He has done a lot of stuff over the years to become more and more popular and all kinds of different things. One of the things that he has gotten into is things where he tries to help people, to use his platform to help other people out. But the helping other people out is also creating content for his channel. So he recently did one in which he was helping people get a kind of surgery, 1,000 people. He got surgery for people who are suffering from a form of correctable blindness, which I didn't know about. But, there you go. It costs money to get the surgery, but he got them the surgery. He restored their eyesight, and then he made, kind of amazing, reaction videos. People, were excited to be able to see. Everybody who does anything gets yelled at on the internet these days, and there was a diverse range of criticisms thrown at MrBeast over this, which were summed up in a BuzzFeed piece by Kelsey Weekman. And out of all of this, I mean, there was one I thought was like the peak of a loopy criticism that came here, which is, she writes, another huge problem. MrBeast's video seems to regard disability as something that needs to be solved. He doesn't say in the video or in any of his subsequent public statements whether he consulted with the video subjects about how they felt to have their disability treated as a problem. That's something that's been argued over in the days since the video was uploaded.
Yeah, I mean,
He wasn't kidnapping people.
Let's just also back up and say, I reread this article several times because I wasn't up on this YouTuber or what he does or anything. So I'm rereading the article and I said, wait, he paid to cure their blindness. And I'm watching these videos and the people, it's very moving. They come out of the surgery and they can see. I mean, it's almost biblical. Like, it's very moving that these people, in my mind, I'm watching the video, they seem quite grateful that they can see. So I was confused about what the criticism was about. I thought, did he trick people? No. So just to be clear, he did not drug these people, kidnap them, and cure their blindness. They signed up to have this surgery paid for, and they understood that he would videotape them afterwards. So I this took me on a journey. This take that it turns out, this is not just a random take, but a point of view on disability that, is actually believed by more than one kind of random person. So this has taken me down a path of a school of thought I was not aware of. Maybe you were, but I was not.
I would say that this is an example of a phenomenon that exists largely on the internet, where it's not so much a take about disability as a kind of prioritizing like discourse over everything else, right? There are all kinds of problems that people have in life, or not problems, right? Differences in physical capacity that people have. And there has been a movement in the world to sort of stop characterizing people by their limits, stop using the phrase disability necessarily, stop talking about, this sort of like deficit model of understanding people who have different kinds of situations going on with their lives. And I get that. I mean, I get where that comes from. And then the idea is, well, look, these people who were suffering from severe cataracts, it actually was just correctable. I mean, they didn't have the money for the surgery. And so they're getting the surgery. They're really happy. And that kind of wrecks the spell that these people who were unable to see due to their cataracts were in a kind of happy community of disabled people, right? As the article says, it treats it as a problem to be solved. Now, with someone myself, I don't have cataracts, but my eyesight is really, really bad. If I take my glasses off, I can barely see anything at this point. I mean, I remember a time when it was like I couldn't read words on the blackboard, but I could get along okay without it. But I mean, I'm hopeless without my eyeglasses, and I do think if for some reason eyeglasses were much more expensive than they are, and there wasn't like vision insurance available and I wasn't able to afford them, and somebody gave me a pair of glasses, I would regard that as a huge benefit to me. And of course, there are people, lower income people who struggle to afford glasses, and we have charities and other things to provide vision care to them. And it's very important because being unable to see, I mean, as I can tell, if I just take my glasses off, like I can't see anything. And it's a big, I guess BuzzFeed is telling me I shouldn't call it a problem, but it is, in practice, my inability to see is not a huge problem because I have glasses. But like one time when I was young and irresponsible, I was out of the house, so I didn't have parents around, but I wasn't my old man self who behaves things responsibly. So I didn't have a backup pair of glasses, and my glasses broke. And I had to go with no glasses downtown on a bus to find a fast optician. It was like, it was really bad, even for just a few hours. And I don't understand the universe in which we're going to pretend that you're not receiving a large benefit if you can have corrective cataract surgery that restores your vision. I mean, I know from my daily life that being able to have my vision corrected is like a huge deal. We don't think about it. It's a very common issue.
Blindness is considered a major hindrance in life. And I mean, it's even one of the rare things you could get a tax break for in the United States, because it's recognized that if you can't see, it limits your ability to work. It's expensive. It's expensive to have that type. To be blind is just it just holds you back in so many ways in life. And even we recognize that as a society. And I understand the argument that people are not, we should look at people as, what can they contribute and how can they participate? And really, that's what the American Disabilities Act is really about. It's not saying that we need to fix people, but we need to recognize that people have different needs and challenges and problems in their life, and we should find ways to include people in society. And so, from my perspective, I'm just from my personal view, I don't think we do enough to include people in society. I mean, the fact that there's a fairly simple surgery that could cure, could help a lot of people see, and it's inaccessible to them, in the richest country on earth, is to me a policy failure. That why can't we offer this to more people? Because then those people could contribute in life. It's good individually for people to be able to see, and we need everyone to participate. And if you look, I was thinking a lot about ADA as I was thinking about this take, and one of the big advocates, she's called the general of the ADA, is Patricia Wright. And she herself is legally blind. And her whole push, she spent her life, and she's still an advocate of pushing for policy changes so that people who have challenges can be included in life, that we make accommodations for people. And it's not to say the whole point is that people are not broken, but people have differences, and we should find ways to include people. And it just kind of seems strange to me. Like there's this sort of lapping that has happened around the idea of inclusion, where somehow solving, Like, to say that somebody has a problem is the same as saying somebody is broken or not, or should be shunned. And that's not what's going on here. And if you start from the position of maybe it's not a problem to not be able to see or not have mobility or to have some type of disorder, that's not a problem, like, how do you it, all of the story of human history is to solve problems and make life better. And it just seems absurd to say, let's start from the position that maybe some people don't want their life to be better and solved through policy changes and practices that let them live the fullest life possible. Like, this is not about what somebody looks like. This isn't about, we need to, it's not, this is an actual setback in life. And that's not diminishing anybody to say it. It's just bizarre to me. I don't know what else to say about it.
Well, I mean, I also think, I do think that this is part of a sort of a broader trend in certain circles that have maybe spent a little bit too much time in grad school or reading grad students on Tumblr sort of third hand, that is prioritizing like discourse issues over concrete material issues, right? Like, my takeaway from reading about this controversy was that I was not aware that there were a large number of people who had surgically correctable blindness in the United States, but were not receiving treatment. It just seems like this is a fairly expensive procedure. I mean, I've been reading about it. It seems like it costs maybe $7,000 to get two eyes repaired this way, less than that in some cases, thanks to certain kinds of programs. And, if you don't have the right kind of insurance at the right time in your life, it can end up being inaccessible. My obvious takeaway to this was, well, there should be a big push to get this universally covered.
Yeah.
People.
I mean, the answer to this shouldn't have to be a young YouTuber.
Right. That's the problem here. And if I have any critique of the video, it's simply that it didn't offer the 5-minute pious interview with the healthcare policy expert at the end to explain what legislative change do we need to make to take care of this. But again, I mean, to go back to my own nearsighted self, right? There is not a tablet handed down by God that distinguishes what's a disability marker from what's just a treatable medical condition, right? Like, the state of science and technology changes all the time. The quality of prosthetic feet that are available to people is much better than it was a generation ago. Which is a major issue after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. People who came back from combat there with partial limb amputations were able to get treatment of a much higher quality than what had been offered to earlier cohorts of veterans. And people who aren't military veterans also wound up benefiting from that. And that was work that was done by medical doctors, by entrepreneurs. I know there was a company in Iceland that sort of specializes in this stuff. And I think we've all seen now there's special racing equipment and stuff that's available to people. And this is good, right? There was a time in human history when there were no eyeglasses and where the kinds of conditions that you in a mild form and I in a severe form have that nobody thinks of as an identity group or that big of a deal would have been a huge problem. I'd be left out on an ice floe somewhere, unable to contribute meaningfully. And, it's good that we have these technical advances. It's good that the state of medical science advances. It's tragic that we don't make the fruits of that science available to everybody who could benefit from it. There should be a better solution than YouTuber charity, but it's just it was. I'm glad he did the video. It has metaphorically opened my eyes to an issue that I was unaware of, as well as the people he helped, and the view that the most important thing here is that we not characterize disability as a problem to be solved is it's dumb. It's a bad take.
You were critiquing him. He didn't have the PSA at the end of his video of if you want to help this cause, etc. But at the same time, that's not his role in the world. He makes videos that are interesting for YouTube, and he does a lot of this kind of stuff. But you would think the takes community would look at this and go, what's going on? What's going on with Medicaid? Are we not covering this? Is this considered not necessary, or is Medicare covering it? The fact that the obvious issue here is a policy failure was not where people went. And I feel really old, but I think in the aughts, that's what it would have been about how do we make access to medical care better? And this idea that it has become a kind of identity politics conversation is not particularly helpful, which is that there was this model who I saw, she was on Instagram, and then she was on the Today Show. And she has this condition. So her name is Mahogany Getter. Anyway, she has a condition, lymphedema, where she has a really swollen leg, and it's actually 100 pounds. Her leg has swollen to be 100 pounds, and she has started taking photos of herself. She has aspirations to be a model, and she's now a model, and she's displaying that leg prominently so you can see her medical problem. And she's being celebrated for not hiding that problem that she has, and celebrating difference and saying, bodies are different and I should be accepted for who I am and I'm beautiful as I am. The thing that was weird to me was in the Today Show coverage, there was this sort of random quote from a nurse practitioner saying there are some treatments for this. And then they kind of move along and celebrate this idea of beauty and challenging that notion and sort of celebrating her. And on the one hand, I totally agree that our notions of beauty are distorted. And I'm glad that there is somebody out there saying, I am different and I'm beautiful. I support this 100%. The thing that I don't understand is that she has a very extreme version of this condition that actually seems like, according to kind of research on it, is actually fixable, or at least could be vastly improved for her. Her overall stature, she's fairly petite woman. So, and I actually think for anybody, if you had one leg that was 100 pounds, it's going to cause all kinds of problems for you, like mobility problems, I'm sure. And the condition itself is also harmful. It's inflammation and other things. It was bizarre to me that we're stopping at this point of she's accepting who she is. Why should she have to accept this condition that she could have fixed? And she can still celebrate how she looks after, whatever surgeries or whatever. But it seems like we should be in a place in the world where if somebody has a medical condition that could be improved and their lifespan could be increased, and their overall quality of life and their ability to move around and participate in the world. It just really frustrated me to see this conversation.
I guess my one hesitancy about that is that I didn't totally understand, how this particular woman's decisions played in with her business and her career in modeling. It's I felt like there was more happening off stage in that account.
Look, she can make whatever decision she wants, but if you're going to have her on your supposed journalistic TV show, I think it's a fair question to ask of, have you looked into getting this treated?
I mean, I agree. I didn't think it was a great segment. So if you read the kind of BuzzFeed plays, it's not just this kind of disability discourse. There seems to be this kind of other view that it's just it's bad that he is engaged in commerce. The article quotes someone complaining about inspiration porn, someone else saying it's the never-ending cycle of content creation that makes MrBeast feel insidious. The dystopian thought that we're reliant on YouTube views instead of competent government for assistance. If you want to see a microcosm of how the ableist mindset pervades society writ large, check out the replies to MrBeast's tweet. I agree that, of course, MrBeast doing this video to get views and go viral on the internet is not like an optimal way for society to address cataract problems. But it just seems like a failure of cause and effect, right? That like this is a common, I think, issue that people have in thinking through the world is to just like find a sad situation, people who can't afford corrective surgery that will let them see, or I mean, I think all the time, people in very poor countries who have bad job opportunities and very low incomes. And then whoever interacts with that situation in any way gets like blamed, because really the optimal solution would be to abolish poverty or have healthcare for everyone, which is true, but also that wasn't the situation, right? Like everybody is out here trying to make a living, and the ways in which we try to make a living also impact the world. We're doing this podcast. We do our journalism. Like we get paid for it. The other people we work with also get paid. We're all trying to make money, but we also hope that the stories we do are informative and entertaining and that people get something out of it. And, if we were doing bad work, you would criticize us for that. If we do good work, I think we'd like to be praised for it. And MrBeast, like, it's the same, right? He could be doing stunts that harm people, and that would be bad. I'd say, you know what? Getting views for your YouTube, that doesn't outweigh the harm that you're doing with these bad videos. But there is no harm in this video. Like, he is, in fact, helping all these people who were not being helped by the government or by anybody else. And that's good, right? Like, this would be a good niche for people to go find unsolved problems in society, address them to get attention and clicks. Like that's, he's got to do something for content. Like this seems like one of the best things he could possibly be doing.
I agree with this, that there's a tendency to criticize people who are representing stories of people who are having whatever challenge or hard time. That it's, okay, you are profiting off of, there's two ideas here I think you're talking about, which is one, profiting off of the situation of another person, which again, we live in a world. I mean, that's the world that we live in, that people need to make a living, and how you make that living, there's a lot of things you could do. And in this case, here's a person who's thinking, instead of making content about beating people up, which, there's plenty of really bad, scary things on YouTube. I don't know if you're aware. Violent things, etc. He's not doing that. He's choosing to do, try to do some good for people. Two, you started to touch on this, which I want to unpack a little bit more, which is the cause and effect of all this, that somehow he's being held up as ableist because, that he is creating a culture of stigmatization of people who have a disability or a difference or a challenge, et cetera, that he's the reason why we continue to have this attitude. But the reason we have, I would say, this attitude is that there's not a lot being done really to include people. For example, making surgery accessible so that they can lead fuller lives. And just because he's the one that you see because he's making the videos, but he's not the source of the problem. And I don't know if that's what you were thinking, but I get that feeling that it's somebody reporting on what's going on is somehow the cause of the problem. I mean, shooting the messenger is kind of obvious at this point, but it feels that way on some level.
But also it's this concept of dystopian, kind of being invoked here, where it's like, if the surgery didn't exist at all, right? If it just wasn't possible to address people's cataracts, then I, the sort of content consumer, wouldn't think anything of it. My only responsibility would be to have an appropriate subjective attitude toward people suffering blindness, right? But because the surgery was invented, but it costs money to get surgery done on your eyes, now the fact that people can get the surgery, but they need a way to get the money to get the surgery, that becomes dystopian. And I get it. I mean, I get why people may sort of have that reaction, but like, part of being an adult is trying to learn to like reason through these things, right? And be like, what about this situation is dystopian? Would anyone be better off if MrBeast had not made this video? And the answer is no. Would anyone be better off if doctors had not pioneered this surgery? And the answer is no. Would anyone be better off if we said, look, you're not allowed to charge money for this skill and labor intensive surgery. You just like have to do it out of the goodness of your own heart or not. And like, no, right? Because there would be a limited amount of that going on. And everything everyone involved in this has done is good. It is making people better off. It is making the world a better place. If there is a further problem that not enough people are getting access to the surgery, we have to think about why that is. Like, how many people are suffering from this problem? What are the barriers to larger access? Because on its face, it's money. But there are also objective constraints, right? Presumably only so many people have the training. You give me $7,000, I'm not going to cure your blindness. I have no idea how to do it, right? So, and I don't know, but this is like, if you see a video like this, which, this is not a Nova documentary. It's not a thoughtful grid article. It's a kind of slightly goofy inspiration porn. Is not a terrible word for it, but it's more stigmatizing than I would want it to be.
Look, I'll be honest, it is a little tacky. Okay, like, fair enough, it's a little tacky,
but it made me want to know more. It made me frustrated that the decision was to assign an article aggregating people complaining rather than just doing a more serious article about this surgery, right? Where you like talk to people who are involved in some way in the healthcare system and healthcare financing. I read a book recently that will be coming out soon by Amy Finkelstein about the healthcare system. And she's an economist at MIT and a very serious person. And one of the things she kind of complains about in this book is that America obviously doesn't have a universal healthcare system, but we do have Medicare, which provides universal healthcare to the elderly. But then every once in a while, some kind of medical issue becomes a sufficient subjective congressional concern that you get coverage for that issue, right? And there's no really principled basis for the decision of like which things has Congress acted on and which things haven't they, which was interesting to think about. One example is if you have total kidney failure, Medicare will cover the treatment that you need. But if you're like starting to have kidney disease problems that have not yet reached the bar of total failure, and you don't have insurance, you won't be able to get the treatment you need. You need to get worse and worse for several years. And as she says, like that seems dumb, right? That's expensive and harmful to people. But this is the kind of thing, she's an MIT professor, not a 24-year-old YouTube star. And when you see interest in something like this and think, well, okay, maybe this guy's take was like not as deep as it could have been. The journalistic solution is to try to get deeper, not just reiterate other people's superficial responses to a slightly superficial treatment, but to say, okay, like this video has helped 1,000 people, but it has also raised a lot of questions about cataract surgery, about health insurance, and like try to help people understand what's going on here. Like actually like participate.
In terms of addressing problems, right? There is a tendency now to react to situations and say, I don't like this, and my worldview is X. And that's why, I have this ideological objection to capitalistic endeavors and using money to solve problems or whatever the case, that you have a sort of ideological framework that you are holding up and using any instance to showcase that. And it's not that type of discourse, which we've talked about as it relates to other issues, is really, I think, irksome to you and me, because we think very literally of, why don't we look at this and unpack what's going on here and maybe come up with some solutions. I think that would lead you, like you're kind of describing, to potentially incremental progress, right? That we can't snap our fingers and overnight everybody who needs this surgery is going to get it. As you say, there might not be enough doctors. There might be this, there are challenges that would need to be identified and overcome, and that it would be an incremental process to solve the problem. And that is just not of interest to members of the air quote discourse. And in fact, we've seen that, I would say, in the last 10 years, but at least since I saw it kind of rearing its head fully for the first time in 2016 during that election cycle, where I think there's a generation of people who are frustrated, who kind of came of age in the Obama years and were very frustrated with the state of things and the economy and other things, and just sort of had this rejection of the notion of incremental progress and interpreting the reason why things are not perfect is that the Democratic Party has not gone far enough to the left. Like, that was sort of the premise, right? Like, if liberals would just go further left, we would be better off. And so anytime that you're bringing the conversation into kind of this place that isn't about, are liberals liberal enough, and just have a really boring conversation about how do you fix a problem, it becomes this place that certain people cannot operate. They just don't see the world as a place where problems can be solved. And I disagree with that. I think that policy and politics can change lives. And if you don't believe that, if your premise is progressives has done nothing, they can do nothing, then all you're kind of left with is this debate about what is the correct belief about the problem, not how do you want to solve it. And the further you can take your belief and look the most correct in the minds of this kind of wing of the internet, it ends up in these kinds of places, right? Like, it ends up in a place where you're looking at this through a lens of identity. And it's like, well, did anybody ask the blind person about how they relate this to their own identity? You could ask somebody that, sure. But I just think that for me, if I had any kind of, blindness, or I was going blind or something, the conversation I personally assume I would want to have is, hey, are you interested in this surgery to correct it?
I do think that we should understand sort of what the issue is here, I think, from a political standpoint.
And it's also, to me, creating things that aren't really political situations and holding up that frame.
It's about the fact that lots of blind people's blindness has other causes, right? And couldn't be addressed through cataract surgery. And the question is, what happens to blind identity if we treat blindness as a problem to be solved, right? As was stated in the article, that there's a somewhat comparable situation. I mean, we both live in Washington, D.C., which is home to Gallaudet University, which is a sort of historically, premier institution of higher education for the deaf, and is a real epicenter of sort of deaf culture and deaf activism. And something I've learned about over the years, through local media and through knowing people here in DC is, there is a movement to sort of characterize deaf with a capital D as an identity group, not just a hearing problem. And to say that there is a deaf culture and deaf society, deaf identity that has its own language. I mean, it has multiple languages, but in the United States has an American Sign Language culture. and that is quite hostile to the surgical corrections for deafness that are now available in many cases, because they see that as, impinging on deaf culture and deaf identity. And I kind of thought that after Coda won the Oscar last year, that we would get more sort of mainstream coverage of this topic, just because it's interesting, and it's not what that movie is about, but it's definitely a movie about deaf culture and its sort of interactions with people. And obviously, if I for some reason lost my hearing, and then I could have it fixed with surgery, or I could try to learn a whole new language, I would rather have the surgical solution. But I do understand where people are coming from, where the capital D deaf activists are coming from, and what they're saying.
And Gallaudet had a big debate a number of years ago about the new dean could hear, and there was a question about that of, could you lead Gallaudet and be able to hear that? Are you representing a community? And this is not new. I mean, if I remember, the first time I heard of this was, I don't know, 15 years ago. I was watching an episode of House, and it was about deaf parents, and they had this child, and the question was, could the hospital implant a device to allow the child to hear? And the parents were saying, no, we don't want our child to have the device. And so it's a sort of debate about this. The idea of a deaf community makes sense, right? Because deaf people get together and have a unique way of communicating through sign language, American Sign Language, or whatever language that they're using.
It's very common to define cultures around languages. Americans have a certain kinship culturally with Canadians and Australians and British people, because we all speak the same language. And the nature of deafness is that it specifically impacts which languages they communicate in. And they have unique sign-based languages that, create communicative cultures amongst themselves, including their hearing people who are quite fluent in sign languages, just as people can learn other kinds of foreign languages. So, I mean, I would say yes, that is distinguishing from other kinds of things in the world, that we always have language communities, have a strong sense of shared identity. And there's a lot of language extinction phenomena happening around the world. I think actually a majority of languages spoken in the world are spoken by very small groups of people, and they're under threat of extinction. And there's a lot of sort of mixed feelings and questions about all that. And I would distinguish it from blindness in that regard. But I do think that to understand this bad take, it's a sort of discourse by analogy that I think was leading people astray here, that without really thinking hard about the specifics of the cataract situation, they are just kind of, picking up bits and pieces of social justice jargon that they've learned here and there, and applying it to situations that don't, really fit well.
I think one place that this would have been interesting to take is around CRISPR, where, okay, could we remove genes for example, dwarfism, which has come up, and is that a problem to have that condition, or is it not? And there are members of that community who talk about this, that if we go down this path of eliminating genetic differences, what does that mean? Are we saying everyone has to fit a certain model? Does everyone have to look a certain way? Does everyone have to be the same height? Are we going to start over-selecting by gender? And that actually is a place where there's real conversation, in my opinion, that as the technology advances on that, of how we can shape people before they're ever born, is one, thrilling. If you know anybody who has something that's been a genetic condition that they live with, and some of them are terrible, that they go through a lifetime of all kinds of problems, and making them more susceptible to cancers and other things. What if you could prevent that? so no one has to have that. And I think some people who have those conditions would say that's a miracle, that's miraculous if we could just strip this before it ever happens.
One, I think, slightly bad take that MrBeast himself offered on Twitter was he said, I don't understand why curable blindness is a thing. Why don't governments step in and help? I agree with that. But then he followed up, even if you're thinking purely from a financial standpoint, it's hard to see how they don't ROI on taxes from people being able to work again. So I thought of that take and I almost said it myself. And then I thought a little bit harder about it. And I think the reason not to bring too much of the fiscal ROI issue into it is that obviously a certain number of the people with severe cataracts are quite elderly, and probably would not generate significant amounts of additional tax revenue off of this. And you don't want to sort of ground the argument in those kind of issues.
I think it's a bad idea.
I mean, I get it. He's trying to drum up support. A question of earnestness. There's a doctor named Jeffrey Levinson who's a surgeon in Jacksonville. He has a nonprofit that has been doing these surgeries for 20 years that he raises money for. He's done like a TED Talk about this situation. And he explains the issue in sort of more calm, quantitative terms. There's about 200 million people who could benefit from this surgery who don't seem to be able to access it. And they're obviously mostly people who are in low-income countries, not just in the United States. And so that is a scale of, and those people count too, right? I mean, Medicare could, and I think should, just cover this for Americans. But, the larger problems of the world are going to require either more influxes of funds from other places or just more general economic development in low-income countries. There's a lot of health problems in low-income countries that could be usefully addressed with money. And I don't know if this particular one is the highest value add, but it's a reminder that I think people in the United States can get a little cavalier at times about the value of economic development in low-income countries. But, 200 million people is a lot. And this is not at all the only treatable medical condition that goes widely untreated in poor countries. And that happens because when countries are poor, they can't provide these kind of services to people who need them. But that's sort of the scale of the issue. MrBeast is obviously not the solution, but a big thing that we do here in content is bring issues to people's attention. And I think in addition to the direct help that was provided, that's been a great service from this episode, and that the people dumping on him, that it's not a good take. It's a bad take.
I agree. It is a bad take.
So this has been another episode of Bad Takes from Grid. We're produced, as usual, by District Productive, and we'll be back next week with more bad takes.